Robot Escapes, Chapter 6. The Monster. The cows were munching hay in their stalls when the big barn door slid open and a mechanical monster stomped in from the rain. The creature marched down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing through the cavernous space until she found an empty corner. And there she stood in the shadows as the storm began to rage outside. Everybody listened as the rain poured and the wind howled and the thunder cracked. By midnight, the storm had blown over, and there was only a gentle sprinkle on the roof. But the herd couldn't rest with the monster lurking in the corner. The cows began quietly mooing to each other. What is the monster doing? She hasn't moved in hours. I bet she's waiting to eat us in our sleep. The cows gasped at the horrible thought. Then an old cow named Annabelle tried to calm everyone down. Relax, everyone, she said. There were monsters like this on my last farm. And they never ate any cows. Come to think of it, they never ate anything at all. If this monster has ever eaten anything, she must be awfully hungry by now, said the cow named Tess. I saw a farmer driving the monster in the truck earlier, said the calf named Lily. I don't think he would have done that if she were dangerous. Nobody knew quite what to think of the strange creature in their midst. I think the monster is harmless. I think the monster is unnatural. I think the monster is moving. The herd fell silent as the monster marched in from the shadows and into the middle of the barn. And then the monster did the impossible. She did the unthinkable. She spoke to the cows in the language of the animals. I am not a monster. I am a robot. My name is Roz. Chapter 7, The Robot Story. None of the cows could believe that this monster, this robot, this machine had spoken to them in the animal language. They stared at her, nervously shifting in their stalls, wondering what she would do next. What Roz did next was simple. She told the truth. She stood in the middle of the barn and shared her story with the herd. I spent my first year of life on a remote island, Roz began. I didn't know how I got there. I only knew I wanted to survive. So I studied the island animals to see how they survived, and the surprising thing happened. Their sounds and their movements started making sense to me, and I was learning the language of the animals. Even when I could speak to them, the animals wanted nothing to do with me. But that changed when I discovered an orphaned gooseling. The poor little thing would have died on his own, so I cared for him and adopted him as my son. His name is Brightbill. A murmur spread through the herd. When the animals saw me caring for Brightbill, they finally accepted me. I was no longer alone. I had friends and a family and a home. Life was good until the Resco robots arrived. They came with their sleek white airships to take me away, and when I resisted, they became violent. The animals defended me and they fought bravely to destroy the Rescos, but I was badly damaged in the fight. I needed repairs, and I couldn't get them on the island. So the animals loaded my broken body into the airship, and it took me far away from my home. Lily the calf poked her head through the railings and said, "What about Brightbill?" "My son is smart and tough, and he has a good flock," said Roz. "I think he'll be okay without me." "Where were you taken?" said Tess. "I was taken back to the factory where I was made. The factory is run by a crew of robot workers called the Makers. When I arrived, they put me in a room filled with other broken robots. Some robots were completely ruined, and the Makers immediately sent them away. But those of us with working computer brains were given a test." "What kind of test?" said Lily. "The Makers simply asked us questions. They asked us how we had become damaged. They asked us how we would respond to different emergencies. They asked us to identify certain sounds and smells and objects. The robots who answered every question correctly were repaired. All the others were destroyed. In the wilderness, I camouflaged my body to survive. In the robot factory, I camouflaged my personality to survive. I pretended to be a perfectly normal robot. I did not say that I had adopted a gooseling son, or that I could speak the animal language, or that I had resisted the Rescos. I said what I had to say to pass the test, and it worked. Good for you, Roz, shouted Tess and the other cow animals. The maker shut me off, and when I woke up, my body was fixed, and I was on this farm. Now, like all of you, I belong to Mr. Sharif. The cows stopped smiling. Everyone was quiet. Then old Annabelle spoke up. I was taken away from my friends and family too, she said. They're back on the farm where I was born. I still think about them every day. It is difficult to be apart from our loved ones, said the robot. You know, Roz, things could be worse, said Tess. At least on this farm, you're still surrounded by nature. Yes, things could be worse. The robot's eyes brightened a little. But I'm not safe here. If any human ever learns who I really am, they will destroy me. And that is why, when the time is right, I will try to escape. Chapter 8, The Computer. Inside the barn, the lights were growing low, and the sounds were hushed. The night slowly wore on. A few cows were chomping on hay, but most of the rest were resting peacefully. Our robot had returned to her corner. The soft glow of the computer screen lit up her face as she studied the farm. She learned about the herd, about the pasture and the fields, and about the native plants and the wildlife, about the seasons and the climate and the weather, about the machines and the building and the fences and the tools and the dairy equipment. Every detail was perfectly remembered in the robot's computer brain. And in one single night, Roz became a farmer. Chapter 9, The First Day. At dawn, the cows began to stir. One by one, they walked outside, crossed the muddy barn, and went into the parlor to be milked. They followed that same routine every single morning like clockwork. However, this morning, the cows were joined by a robot. With her computer brain full of farming knowledge, Roz was ready for her first day on the job. She stomped through the tall, wet grass, and her head slowly turned and scanned the scenery. The sun was rising, the fog was lifting, and the cows were grazing. And then the whole world seemed to flip upside down. Before Roz knew what was happening, she was on her back looking at the sky. The strong stench filled the air. Our robot slipped in cow dung. A herd erupted into laughter. Tess called out, "Welcome to Hilltop Farm, Roz," which brought another round of snorts and moos. "You'll get used to the cow patties and to the laughter," said old Annabelle, strolling over. "Not much happens around here, so we're eager to get in a good laugh." "I understand," said Roz. "I like laughing too." She forced out an awkward ha, 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 ha. Then the robot stood up, wiped her feet, and continued exploring the farm. But she was more careful to watch where she stepped. The fields and the buildings and the fences were all in need of Roz's attention, but her most urgent task was to fix the broken farm machines. The herding machine was designed to roll through the pasture and look after the cows while they grazed, but it had gotten stuck in the mud and became a popular hangout for the birds. The field machine was gigantic. It was like a house on wheels, and it was designed to roam the fields, planting and fertilizing and harvesting the feed crops, but had grown and ground itself into a halt about a few weeks ago and was now collecting dust in the far corner of the property. The drone, a small flying machine with a special camera attached to its underside, had also fallen down. It was designed to fly above the farm, but it came crashing down when the mobs of the crows had attacked it. Other broken machines were hidden within clumps of weeds, and still there was more waiting for repairs in the shed. The peaceful morning suddenly came to life by the jolting sounds of power tools as Roz began fixing the machines. Thanks to her robotic strength and smarts, she made excellent progress. The hours flew by and the machines rumbled back to life and the farm began buzzing with activity. At sunset, Rambler came bouncing down the driveway with the Sharifs in the front and Oscar in the back. "How's it going, Roz?" said Mr. Sharif, leaning out the window. The children giggled and waved from their seats, and the dogs sniffed in the breeze. It's going well," said Roz in a robotic voice. So it should say, "It is going well," said Roz in a robotic voice. Many of the machines are working again. I see that. Mr. Sharif gazed up at the drone circling high in the sky. We thought we'd come out to check on you, but it looks like you're doing fine, so we'll stay out of your way. Keep up the good work, Roz. As the truck started rolling down the driveway, Oscar looked back at Roz and barked, "You smell like cow patties." He was right. The robot was filthy and had finished her first day as a farmer by scrubbing herself with soap and water. So I'd like to pause at the end of chapter 8, or I guess that was chapter 9. Pause at the end of chapter 9. I want to ask you why the author made a point of saying that Roz spoke robotically to Mr. Sharif. If you have an answer to that question, I want you to type it in the comments below. And also, why now suddenly is Roz interpreting what Oscar the dog is saying? Remember, he's been barking at her since she got there, but we never knew what Oscar was saying. But now suddenly, she said, the author tells us Oscar barked and said, "You smell like cow patties." Why now do we understand that Roz is able to understand Oscar? Was she able to understand him before, or is this a new skill that she's learned? Something to think about. Moving on to chapter 10, the routine. Reader, I don't want to bore you with every detail of our robot's farming routine. Many of her tasks were incredibly dull. Others were quite unpleasant. I'll just say that on any given day, Roz might have to be a mechanic or a veterinarian or a gardener or a plumber or a cleaner or a landscaper or a carpenter or an electrician or all the above. Farm life kept Roz very busy. Of course, she did have help. You already know about some of the other machines on the farm, but the entire farm was equipped with technology that made life easier for everyone. Doors and gates opened automatically. The cows wore electronic collars that kept a track of their health automatically. When a cow's udders were full, she simply strolled into the parlor where she'd be milked by gentle machines. All the milk was piped into storage tanks, cooled and bottled automatically, and once the milk truck was loaded up, it drove away and made its deliveries automatically. Mr. Sharif managed the business side of the farm. He dealt with the customers and handled the money and ordered the supplies, and he did it all from the comfort of his own office. Now that he had a robot to do all the farm work, he hardly ever left his house. Roz was more content than she had ever expected to be. Most of her time was spent outdoors with the animals under the wide open sky. Even while laboring in the fields, she could always stop to smell the flowers, look up at the clouds, and feel the cool air drifting out from the trees. And yet Roz was living two lives. She had a life here on the farm. She could play with the calves or run through the grass or chat with the wildlife. But whenever Mr. Sharif was near, Roz had to pretend to be a normal robot. She could never let anybody know who she really was. Chapter 11. The Stragglers. Wild geese are known for migrating in autumn and spring, but exactly when a flock migrates is up to its members. Some flocks choose to fly early in the season and others straggle far behind. And it was one of those straggling flocks that caught the attention of our robot. Honk, honk, honk. The geese in the herd, The geese were heard before they were seen. Their honking voices echoed across the farm, and then the flock appeared above the fields. Flying and wobbling in a V formation, they glided over the pasture and plunked down into the farm and onto the pond. None of them were very concerned as Roz approached. The geese had seen these creatures on other farms before, and they knew that they were nothing to fear. But they were about to learn that our robot was different from all the others. "Hello, geese," said Roz. "Welcome to Hilltop Farm." The geese froze. They stared at Roz with suspicious eyes, and then the biggest goose slowly swam over. "I've come across plenty of monsters like you," he said, "but I've never met one who could talk." "I am not a monster. I am a robot. My name is Roz." The goose scratched his head. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Roz, the robot," he said at last. "My name is Wingtip, and this is my flock." Roz gave a friendly wave, and soon the flock was gathered around the curious creature. As you can imagine, the geese were shocked to learn that Roz had a goose for a son. They asked her all kinds of questions about Brightbill and her old life on the island and about her new life on the farm. When Roz asked them questions of her, and then Roz asked them questions of her own. Do you think Brightbill's flock would ever come out this way on their migration? Doubtful, said Wingtip. It sounds like that flock takes the eastern flies. They'd never come this far west. The robot slumped with disappointment. However, these geese were full of surprises, add Wingtip. I'll promise you this, Roz. If we ever see Brightbill, we'll point him in your direction. The talk was interrupted by giggling and barking. The children were taking their dog for a walk. Roz couldn't be seen chatting with geese, so she whispered a quick goodbye to her new friends and went back to work. And when she looked down at the pond later, she saw that the flock was gone. Chapter 12, The Homesick Robot. We all feel homesick at one time or another. Even the robot felt something like homesickness. Roz belonged with her son and her friends on the island, and she was determined to find a way to get back there. But how? If the robot was seen doing anything unusual, Mr. Sharif might have her destroyed. Roz had to be careful, so she calmly went back to her farm work day in and day out. But all the while, the homesick robot was secretly planning her escape.